Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into the stack of sources you share with us and surface only the most surprising, essential knowledge. Today we're exploring something truly fundamental, the engine room of the planet itself, plant nutrition. We are zooming in on a process that, well, it underpins pretty much all other life. How plants, these quiet giants all around us, actually manage to feed themselves.
It's something we often take for granted, isn't it? But every single living thing on Earth, from the tiniest microbe to the biggest blue whale, it needs food. And it's not just about energy, like fuel. Food gives us the essential building blocks: carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, all those nutrients we need to, well, build our bodies, repair things, and run all our internal chemistry.
Yeah, and our sources jump right into this basic split, dividing the whole living world into two main camps based on how they get this crucial fuels, like the ultimate nutritional divide.
Exactly. On one side, you've got the builders. The proper term is autotrophs. That comes from Greek. Auto meaning self, and trophos for nourishment. These are the organisms, mainly green plants, that perform this kind of biological miracle. They actually make their own complex food from really simple stuff around them: water, carbon dioxide from the air, basic minerals from the soil. They're the self-feeders, the foundation.
And then there's Reno. Well, there's everybody else, including us. We're the dependents, or heterotrophs. We rely on others, heteros, for our food. Humans, animals, fungi. We all fall into this massive group. Our entire existence really depends directly or indirectly on those autotrophs doing their job. If the plants fail, the whole system eventually collapses.
It's a stark reality. So our mission for this deep dive is pretty ambitious. We want to go beyond just the definitions. We need to tackle the real how. How do plants actually synthesize food using sunlight? Where exactly is this food factory located, right down to the tiny parts inside the cells? And crucially, what about the exceptions? The fascinating, sometimes almost aggressive plants that don't play by the rules, the ones that become parasites or digest dead things or even hunt.
Okay, let's start right there with that central mystery, section 1. The ultimate food factory: photosynthesis. When you dig into the source material, this idea of the food factory pops up immediately. And we know the main factories are the leaves, which means logically all the raw materials, water from the ground, gas from the air, they all have to get to the leaves. But the big question, the one that always seems, well, basic but profound, is why can't we do that? Why can't our bodies just take CO2, water, minerals, and, whip up a sandwich?
And that brings us right to the key difference, the special ingredient, if you will. It's a molecule housed inside the plant cells. It's that famous green pigment, chlorophyll. Chlorophyll isn't just about color. It's a really sophisticated molecule, a biological machine designed specifically to capture the energy from sunlight. Without it, the water and CO2. They just
Right.
remain water and CO2. They don't have the energy to combine.
Right. So for photosynthesis, the sources say there are 4 absolute necessities, no exceptions.
That's correct. 4 key ingredients. First, you need water and minerals. These are absorbed from the soil by the plant's roots. Second, carbon dioxide, CO2. Plants pull this gas directly from the air around them. Third, you absolutely need chlorophyll, that special light harvesting pigment we just mentioned. And fourth, the power source, sunlight. Our sources rightly call it the ultimate energy source for basically all life on this planet. Chlorophyll's job is to capture that energy.
Okay, so chlorophyll captures the sunlight energy. That's the catalyst. But let's get a bit more technical, because just saying it captures light feels like we're skipping over some amazing biology happening inside the leaf. Where exactly does this happen?
We need to zoom way in, past the leaf itself, past the individual cells, and into tiny structures within those cells called chloroplasts. These are the actual powerhouses, the little green organelles where photosynthesis takes place. And chloroplasts themselves aren't just simple bags. Their internal structure is incredibly organized, like a miniature factory floor designed for maximum efficiency.
Yeah, I remember learning about this. It's not just a blob of green stuff inside. There are internal compartments, right?
Absolutely. Inside each chloroplast, you find these stacks of flattened, membrane-bound sacs. These sacs are called thylakoids. And the stacks of thylakoids, they're called grana. It's within the thylakoid membranes that the first part of photosynthesis happens, the light-dependent reactions. This is where chlorophyll molecules physically absorb photons of light. That energy is used to split water molecules releasing oxygen and to generate short-term energy-carrying molecules ATP and NADPH.
Okay, so the light energy gets converted into chemical energy there in the thylakoids.
Yeah.
But the actual food, the sugar isn't made there yet.
Exactly right. The ATP and NADPH are like charged batteries. They then move out of the thylakoids into the fluid-filled space that surrounds the grana within the chloroplast. This space is called the stroma. And it's in the stroma that the second stage happens, the light-independent reactions, which you might know as the Calvin cycle. This cycle uses the energy from ATP and NADPH to take the CO2 that came in from the air and chemically fix it, building it into glucose, which is a simple sugar, a carbohydrate. That's the plant's food.
And the main enzyme doing that heavy lifting, grabbing the CO2 and sticking it onto an organic molecule, isn't that supposed to be like the most abundant protein on the entire planet?
You're talking about rubisco, ribulose 1-pillar-5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase. Yes, rubisco is the enzyme that kicks off the Calvin cycle by fixing CO2. It's absolutely critical. But interestingly, it's also known for being somewhat, well, inefficient. Especially when it gets hot or CO2 levels are low, rubisco can mistakenly grab oxygen instead of CO2, which actually wastes energy. This process is called photorespiration.
Ah, right. And that inefficiency actually drove some major evolutionary innovation, didn't it? The sources hint at this complexity when they talk about different types of photosynthesis, like C3 and C4 plants.
Yes, exactly. It's a fantastic example of adaptation. Most plants, maybe 85% of them, are C3 plants. This means the first stable carbon compound they make after fixing CO2 has 3 carbon atoms. But in hot, dry conditions, these C3 plants really suffer from that photorespiration problem because rubisco starts binding oxygen more.
So C4 plants evolved workaround, a clever biological hack.
They absolutely did. C4 plants like corn, sugarcane, and many tropical grasses evolved a completely different leaf anatomy and an extra step before the Calvin cycle. They use a different enzyme, first PEP carboxylase, which is much better at grabbing CO2 even at low concentrations and doesn't accidentally grab oxygen. They fix CO2 into a 4-carbon compound in the outer cells, mesophyll cells, and then shuttle this compound deeper into the leaf into specialized bundle sheath cells which surround the leaf veins. Inside these bundle sheath cells, they release the CO2 again, creating a really high concentration right where rubisco and the Calvin cycle are operating. This basically swamps rubisco with CO2 and minimizes that wasteful photorespiration.
Wow, so it's like a CO2 pump concentrating it right where it's needed. That's a serious logistical upgrade.
It's a huge advantage in hot, sunny, and sometimes dry environments. It costs a bit more energy up front, but the payoff in efficiency under those conditions is massive.
Okay, so whether it's C3 or C4, the overall result, the basic chemical equation for this incredibly complex process remains the same.
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide plus water
In the presence of sunlight and catalyzed by chlorophyll.
yields carbohydrate plus oxygen.
That's the bottom line. And the output is crucial in 2 ways. The plant gets its food, the carbohydrate, which it usually stores short-term as glucose or long-term as starch. And the byproduct, which is absolutely essential for us and most other animals, is oxygen gas released into the atmosphere. You know, that classic school experiment where you test a leaf for starch, maybe one kept in the dark versus one in the light. That's direct chemical proof that photosynthesis has happened. The starch is the stored food.
Okay. Makes sense. But before we move on to how the plant actually gets all these ingredients to the factory, we have to address that visual thing. What about plants that aren't green, like those deep red maples or purple basil? If chlorophyll is green and essential, how do they do it?
That's a really common question. And it highlights something important about pigments. Those plants do have chlorophyll. They absolutely do. It's just that they also produce large amounts of other pigments, like anthocyanins, which make reds, purples, blues, or carotenoids, yellows, oranges. These other pigments are so abundant that they essentially mask the green color of the chlorophyll, but the chlorophyll is still there, embedded in the chloroplasts, capturing light energy and driving photosynthesis just like in a green leaf. It's just visually overwhelmed.
So the green machinery is still running,
Yeah.
just hidden under a different coat of paint, basically.
That's a pretty good analogy, yes.
All right, let's shift gears to logistics. If the leaves are the factories, the plant needs a seriously efficient delivery network to get the raw materials there and ship out the products. We're talking plumbing and ventilation on a massive scale.
Absolutely. And while all living things are made of cells with nuclei and cytoplasm, for this discussion, we need to focus on the specialized tissues and structures that make large-scale transport possible in plants. Forget the basic cell biology for a moment. Let's talk infrastructure.
Okay, let's start underground. Water and dissolved minerals are in the soil, often deep down. The roots absorb them. How on earth do they get up to leaves, sometimes fighting gravity for tens or even hundreds of feet?
This relies on a remarkable internal plumbing system. The plant has specialized tissues containing long, hollow, pipe-like structures. These are the vessels that form continuous tubes running all the way from the finest root tips up through the main roots into the stem, branching out into the limbs, and finally reaching into the network of veins within every leaf.
And this plumbing system, this tissue, is called xylem, right?
Exactly. Xylem tissue is primarily responsible for the transport of water and dissolved minerals upwards from the roots. It's made mostly of dead cells that form these hollow tubes. And the movement isn't based on pumping, like our heart. It relies on the physical properties of water itself, specifically cohesion, water molecules sticking to each other, and adhesion, water molecules sticking to the xylem walls.
So it forms like a continuous water chain.
Precisely. Imagine a continuous, unbroken column of water extending from the roots to the leaves. Water evaporates from the surfaces of cells inside the leaf, a process called transpiration. As water molecules evaporate, they pull on the molecules behind them due to cohesion, pulling the entire water column upwards. It's a passive process driven by evaporation at the top.
That transpiration pull, it's amazing that evaporation from leaves can pull water up a tall tree.
It's incredibly powerful. And that leads us directly to the next logistical challenge: getting the other crucial ingredient, carbon dioxide, into the leaf.
Right, CO2. It's a gas in the air. You can't exactly suck that up through the roots and xylem pipes.
No, you can't. So the plant needs a way to let atmospheric CO2 enter the leaf tissues directly. This happens through thousands of tiny microscopic pores, mostly on the underside of the leaves. These pores are called stomata. Singular. Stoma.
Stomata. I think I remember these. They're like little mouths or gates on the leaf surface.
That's a good way to think of them. They are pores that open directly into the air spaces within the leaf, allowing CO2 to diffuse in right to where the photosynthetic cells are. And conveniently, they also allow the oxygen produced during photosynthesis to diffuse out.
But here's the tricky part, isn't it? These stomata can't just be wide open all the time, especially in dry conditions.
Absolutely not, because while they let CO2 in, they also let water vapor out. That transpiration process we talked about, the driving force for water movement. Most of that water loss happens through open stomata.
So the plant has to regulate them. Open them enough to get CO2, but close them enough to avoid drying out.
Exactly. It's a constant balancing act. Each stoma, each pore, is flanked by a pair of specialized cells called guard cells. These guard cells can change shape. When they absorb water and become turgid or swollen, they bow outwards, opening the pore between them. When they lose water and become flaccid, they relax and the pore closes.
And what controls whether the guard cells are swollen or not? Is it light? Water availability?
It's a combination of factors. Light typically triggers opening because photosynthesis needs CO2. High CO2 levels inside the leaf can trigger closing. Water stress is a major factor. If the plant starts to wilt, hormones signal the guard cells to lose water and close the stomata to conserve what's left. Even time of day plays a role, with many plants closing stomata at night. It's a highly sophisticated dynamic regulation system.
It really is a trade-off then. Open the gates for food, you risk losing water. Close the gates to save water, you risk starving for CO2.
That's the fundamental dilemma for land plants. And how effectively they manage their stomata is key to their survival in different environments.
Now, sometimes the environment is so harsh, the plant has to rethink its factory design entirely. We touched on desert plants earlier, using their stems.
Right, desert plants, or xerophytes, face extreme water scarcity. For many of them, having large, flat leaves with lots of stomata would be suicidal due to water loss. So their leaves often become highly modified, sometimes reduced to tiny scales, or even sharp spines, like in cacti. This drastically reduces the surface area for transpiration. Spines also offer defense against thirsty animals, which is a bonus.
So if the leaves aren't doing the job or are barely there, where does photosynthesis happen?
The job shifts primarily to the stem. Cacti, for example, have thick, green, often fleshy stems that are packed with chlorophyll and photosynthetic cells. The stem surface has stomata, though often fewer, or sunken in pits, to reduce water loss. These stems also often store large amounts of water, and many desert plants employ specialized forms of photosynthesis, like CAM, crassulacean acid metabolism, where they only open their stomata at night to collect CO2 when it's cooler and more humid, store it chemically, and then process it during the day when sunlight is available but the stomata are safely closed. It's another layer of adaptation.
Incredible engineering, really. All driven by the need to balance food production with water conservation.
Nature's solutions are often breathtakingly clever.
Okay, so we've got the plant making its basic energy food, carbohydrates, made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's great for fuel. But life needs more complex molecules. What about proteins? What about fats?
That's the next crucial step. To build enzymes, cell structures, DNA, RNA, plants need to synthesize proteins. And proteins are fundamentally different because they contain nitrogen. They are nitrogenous substances. Fats and oils, lipids, are also essential, primarily made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen like carbs, but structured differently for energy storage and membranes.
Nitrogen. Okay, but wait, the air around us is like almost 80% nitrogen gas.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that be super easy for plants to get? Just breathe it in through the stomata like CO2.
If only it were that simple. That's one of the great ironies of biology. The atmosphere is flooded with nitrogen, but in its gaseous form, TXNO2, it's incredibly stable and pretty much unusable by plants, or animals for that matter. That triple bond between the two nitrogen atoms is very strong and hard to break.
So even though it's everywhere, plants can't just grab it from the air.
Right.
They need it in a different form.
Exactly. They need nitrogen to be fixed, converted from inert TXNO2 gas into chemically reactive forms that can be dissolved in water and absorbed by the roots. The main forms plants can actually use are nitrate ions and ammonium ions, TXNH4 plus ion.
So how does that happen? If the plant can't do it, who does? Where does this usable nitrogen come from?
The vast majority of nitrogen fixation on Earth is carried out by microorganisms, specifically certain types of bacteria and archaea living in the soil and water. It's a vital part of the global nitrogen cycle.
Bacteria in the soil. Okay, break that down for us. How does this microbial process work? Is it just one step?
Oh no, it's a whole microbial assembly line, really. First, you have the nitrogen fixation step itself. Certain bacteria, like Azotobacter, which lives freely in the soil, or Rhizobium, which lives in partnership with certain plants, we'll get to that later, possess a special enzyme called nitrogenase. This enzyme can break the strong triple bond in TXNO2 and combine the nitrogen with hydrogen to form ammonia, or ammonium TXNH4 plus dollars.
Okay, so step one. Bacteria make ammonium. Is that usable by the plant yet?
Ammonium can be used by some plants, but ammonia itself can be toxic in high concentrations. More importantly, much of this ammonia undergoes further transformation in the soil through a process called nitrification, carried out by different groups of bacteria. First, bacteria like Nitrosomonas convert ammonia into nitrate ions, then 107O2. Then other bacteria, like Nitrobacter, quickly convert the nitrite into nitrate ions,
Yeah.
NO3.
Nitrate to nitrate. Why the extra step?
Well, nitrate is the form most readily absorbed and utilized by the majority of plants. It's highly soluble in water, so it moves easily through the soil to the roots and is efficiently transported up through the xylem. So fixation makes ammonia, nitrification turns it into nitrate, and then the plant roots can absorb it along with water.
Wow. So the plant's ability to make proteins totally depends on these multiple groups of bacteria doing their specific jobs in the soil.
That's a bit precarious, isn't it? It highlights the incredible interdependence in ecosystems. Without these soil microbes, the nitrogen cycle would grind to a halt, and most plant life, and therefore animal life, would eventually collapse. And this is precisely why farmers often need to intervene.
Right. Fertilizers. That makes sense now. If the natural soil processes aren't providing enough usable nitrogen quickly enough for intensive agriculture.
Then farmers add it directly. Fertilizers typically contain nitrogen already in the usable forms ammonium or nitrate, along with other essential nutrients like phosphorus, P, and potassium, K. That NPK ratio you see on fertilizer bags, that refers to these three crucial macronutrients that plants need in large amounts. Adding fertilizer bypasses the natural fixation and nitrification steps and gives the plants a direct, readily available supply.
Okay, so once the plant manages to get that soluble nitrogen, whether from microbes or fertilizer, then it has all the building blocks.
Yes. It takes the carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen from photosynthesis, combines them with the absorbed nitrogen and sometimes sulfur, and uses complex biochemical pathways to synthesize all the different amino acids, which are then assembled into the vast array of proteins needed for growth and function. Similarly, it uses the C, H, and O from photosynthesis to build fats and oils for energy storage and membranes. And by combining various elements, it can also synthesize essential vitamins. Now, the plant is truly self-sufficient nutritionally, assuming it can photosynthesize and get nutrients from the soil.
Assuming. Which leads us perfectly into the exceptions, the plants that break these rules. Right, so for all this incredible self-sufficiency of most plants, there's this fascinating group that just doesn't do it. or can't do it. Plants that lack chlorophyll and have to get their food from others, adopting the heterotrophic lifestyle, just like us animals.
It's where the plant kingdom gets really weird and wonderful, showing amazing evolutionary creativity. If you can't make your own food, you have to find another way stealing it, scavenging it, or even hunting it.
Let's start with the thieves, the parasites. The source material gives a classic example.
Yes, the most famous is probably Cuscuta, commonly known as dodder or amorbel. If you've ever seen it, it's unmistakable. This mass of thin yellow or orange wiry stems completely enveloping another plant. It has no visible leaves and certainly no green color. It cannot photosynthesize at all.
So it has to steal everything. How does it physically do that? It doesn't have a mouth.
No, but it has something arguably more insidious. Cuscuta produces specialized structures called haustoria. These are root-like projections that penetrate into the host plant's tissues. They actually tap directly into the host's vascular system, specifically the phloem, which transports the sugars made during photosynthesis, and sometimes the xylem too, for water and minerals. So Cuscuta is literally sucking the lifeblood, the ready-made food, right out of its host.
That's pretty brutal. And because it's draining the host of valuable nutrients, it obviously harms it, right?
Oh, definitely. A heavy infestation can severely weaken, stunt, or even kill the host plant. It fits the definition of a parasite perfectly. An organism living on or in another organism, the host, and deriving nutrients at the host's expense. And the sources prompt us to think broader here. Are things like mosquitoes, bedbugs, lice, leeches, animals that suck our blood, also parasites by this definition?
Well, yeah, they live on a host and take nutrients, harming us in the process. Seems like the same strategy, just across different kingdoms.
Exactly. The underlying nutritional mode is parasitism.
Okay, from stealing from the living, let's move to consuming the dead, the saprotrophs.
Right. This is saprotrophic nutrition. Sapro means rotten or decaying. So these are organisms that get their nutrients from dead organic matter, fallen leaves, dead wood, corpses, leftover food. They are nature's recyclers.
And the prime examples here are the fungi, aren't they? Mushrooms popping up on a lawn, mold on old bread, mildew in the bathroom.
Precisely. Fungi are fascinating. They look a bit plant-like sometimes, growing in one place, but they have no chlorophyll, no photosynthesis, and unlike animals, they don't ingest food through a mouth and digest it internally. Instead, fungi perform external digestion. They secrete powerful digestive enzymes out of their cells directly onto the dead organic material they're growing on.
So they dissolve the food outside their bodies first.
Exactly. Those enzymes break down the complex molecules in the decaying matter, things like cellulose, lignin, proteins, into much simpler, smaller, soluble molecules. The fungus then absorbs these pre-digested nutrients directly through its cell walls. It's like dissolving your dinner before you eat it.
That's a very different approach. And while they're essential decomposers, breaking down dead stuff and returning nutrients to the soil, fungi can also be a real nuisance, as the sources point out.
They certainly can be. Fungal spores are microscopic and incredibly abundant in the air everywhere. All they need to germinate and grow is a bit of warmth and moisture. That's why they readily colonize damp clothes, leather shoes, stored food like pickles or bread, causing spoilage. And in agriculture, fungal diseases, rusts, smuts, blights, wilts cause enormous economic damage, destroying crops in the field or in storage. Some fungi are beneficial, of course, like yeasts for baking and brewing, or those that produce antibiotics, but many are decomposers or pathogens.
Okay, parasites steal, saprotrophs decompose. Now for the really headline-grabbing group, the insectivorous plants, the hunters.
Yes, these are perhaps the most famous rule breakers. Plants like the pitcher plant, Venus flytrap, sundew. They've evolved mechanisms to trap and digest insects and other small animals.
Let's focus on the pitcher plant example from the sources. How does that trap work? It looks like, well, a pitcher.
It's an amazing modification of a leaf. The leaf blade is shaped into a deep, pitcher-like or jug-like structure. The very tip of the leaf often forms a lid over the opening. The inner walls of the pitcher are often slippery or lined with downward-pointing hairs, making it easy for an insect, perhaps attracted by nectar near the rim, to fall in, but very difficult to climb out.
And then what happens at the bottom?
At the bottom of the pitcher, the plant secretes a pool of liquid containing digestive enzymes, similar in function to our own stomach juices. Once an insect is trapped and drowns in the fluid, the enzymes break down its body, particularly the proteins. The plant then absorbs the released nutrients, especially nitrogen and phosphorus.
Nitrogen again. This brings up that question the sources pose, the apparent contradiction. Pitcher plants are usually green, they have chlorophyll, they can photosynthesize. So if they can make their own sugar, why go to all the trouble of evolving complex traps to eat insects?
This is the key point that suggests they are partial heterotrophs. The fact that they hunt likely indicates something about their environment. Insectivorous plants typically grow in very specific habitats, like acidic bogs or waterlogged soils. These environments are often extremely poor in essential mineral nutrients, particularly usable nitrogen.
So the photosynthesis provides the energy, the carbohydrates.
Right, they make their own sugars for energy.
But the insects provide the crucial building blocks, the nitrogen and minerals that are missing from the soil.
Exactly. They supplement their diet. They photosynthesize like a normal plant for their carbon and energy needs, but they act like predators to obtain the minerals, especially nitrogen, that their roots simply cannot get enough of from the nutrient-poor soil they live in. It's a brilliant adaptation to a challenging environment, combining both autotrophic and heterotrophic strategies.
Okay, so we've seen plants as self-feeders, thieves, decomposers, and even hunters. But there's another major way organisms interact nutritionally: cooperation. Relationships where both sides benefit, which the sources call symbiosis.
Symbiosis, meaning living together, describes close, long-term interactions between different biological species. While it can include parasitism, benefit for one, harm for the other, we often use it to refer to mutualism, where both partners gain something from the relationship, sharing resources, shelter, or nutrients.
And the sources give a classic, very visible example of this. Lichens, we see them everywhere, on rocks, trees, but they aren't actually a single organism, are they?
No, they're a composite organism, a fantastic example of symbiosis. A lichen is an intimate partnership between two, sometimes even three, distinct organisms, primarily a fungus and an alga, or sometimes a cyanobacterium, which can also photosynthesize. The alga, having chlorophyll, performs photosynthesis. It produces the sugars, the food, for both itself and the fungus.
Okay, so the alga provides the food. What does the fungus bring to the table? Why does the alga need it?
The fungus provides the physical structure, the body of the lichen. It surrounds and protects the algal cells from harsh environmental conditions, like drying out or excessive sunlight. Critically, the fungus is much better at absorbing water and extracting mineral nutrients from the surface they're growing on, bare rock, tree bark, whatever it might be. So the fungus provides shelter, water, and minerals, and in return, the alga provides the carbohydrates. It allows them to colonize environments where neither could survive alone.
Perfect team. And this kind of fungal partnership isn't just in lichens, right? Don't many plants have fungi living with their roots?
Yes, that's another incredibly important symbiotic relationship called mycorrhiza, which literally means fungus root. The vast majority of land plants actually form mycorrhizal associations. Certain types of fungi form a network of fine filaments, hyphae, that associate intimately with the plant's roots, either forming a sheath around them or even penetrating into the root cells. These fungal networks extend far out into the soil, vastly increasing the surface area for absorption. The fungi are particularly good at acquiring phosphorus and other minerals, and water, which they then pass on to the plant root.
And what does the fungus get in return for providing these hard-to-get nutrients?
It gets fed by the plant. The plant, making sugars through photosynthesis in its leaves, transports some of those sugars down to the roots, specifically to nourish its fungal partner. Again, a classic mutual exchange benefiting both.
But perhaps the most crucial symbiosis, certainly for agriculture and getting nitrogen back into the system naturally, involves bacteria again.
Absolutely. This brings us back full circle to that nitrogen problem we discussed. There's a specific group of plants, the legumes, think peas, beans, lentils, clover, alfalfa, peanuts, that have evolved a remarkable symbiotic relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria called rhizobium.
We mentioned rhizobium earlier as bacteria that can do nitrogen fixation, turning atmospheric N2 into ammonia. But you said they often live with plants.
Yes. While some nitrogen-fixing bacteria live freely in the soil, rhizobium specifically forms a partnership with legumes. The bacteria invade the plant's root hairs, and the plant responds by forming specialized structures on its roots called nodules. Inside these nodules, the rhizobium bacteria live and are protected. Crucially, the plant provides the bacteria with carbohydrates, food produced via photosynthesis.
And in return for room and board.
In return, the rhizobium bacteria work tirelessly, using their nitrogenase enzyme to convert atmospheric nitrogen gas, which diffuses into the nodules from the soil air, into ammonia, which the plant can then readily use to make amino acids and proteins. It's an on-site fertilizer factory housed right there in the roots.
That's incredible. The plant literally builds a home for the bacteria that feed it essential nitrogen.
It's a perfect example of coevolution. And the agricultural significance is immense. Legumes essentially enrich the soil with nitrogen themselves. This is why farmers use crop rotation, planting legumes periodically. When the legume plants die and decompose or are plowed back into the soil, that fixed nitrogen becomes available to the next crop grown in that field, reducing the need for expensive and energy-intensive synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. It's a cornerstone of sustainable agriculture.
So whether they're autotrophs pulling nutrients up, parasites stealing, or partners exchanging, plants are constantly drawing minerals out of the soil: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium.
They are. And over time, especially with intensive harvesting, where we remove the plant material, those nutrients get depleted from the soil. The soil nutrient bank account goes down.
Which brings us to the final point about soil health and sustainability.
Exactly. To maintain healthy, productive plant growth, those depleted nutrients need to be replenished. This can happen naturally through the slow breakdown of rocks and decomposition of organic matter, or through these symbiotic relationships like nitrogen fixation. But often, especially in farming, we need to actively help replenish them by adding fertilizers containing specific mineral nutrients, or manures, which provide organic matter and a slower release of various nutrients. Keeping the soil fertile is essential for keeping the plants and ultimately us fed. Hashtag OTRO, summary, and final thought.
Wow, what an incredible journey through the secret life of how plants eat. It's
Yeah.
just staggering, the chemistry and the logistics involved, isn't it? From tiny cellular machines to global nutrient cycles.
It really is. So just to recap the main points, we saw that most green plants are the ultimate autotrophs, using photosynthesis powered by sunlight and chlorophyll, using CO2 and water to make their own carbohydrate food, releasing vital oxygen as a gift to the rest of us.
We dug into the amazing logistics: the xylem pipes pulling water up, the regulated stomatopores managing gas exchange and water loss, and how plants like cacti adapt their whole structure.
We tackled the crucial nitrogen problem, understanding how plants depend on soil microbes or fertilizers to get this element needed for proteins. And then we explored the fascinating exceptions.
Yeah, the rule breakers: the parasitic cuscuta with its penetrating haustoria, the saprotrophic fungi using external digestion on dead matter, and the clever insectivorous plants like the pitcher plant, using photosynthesis for energy, but hunting for missing nutrients.
And finally, we saw the power of cooperation and symbiosis, like the lichens, that fungus-alga partnership, or the vital rhizobium bacteria fixing nitrogen in the root nodules of legumes, a process fundamental to agriculture and ecosystem health.
It really drives home how dynamic plants are, even though they seem so still. All this chemistry, all this transport, all these interactions happening constantly. We even touched on how plants arrange their leaves to maximize sunlight.
Oh, yes, the architecture of a plant, the patterns of leaf arrangement, phyllotaxy, it's all highly optimized for light capture. They need that energy.
But light isn't always benign, right? Too much intense sunlight can actually damage the photosynthetic machinery. So they need to capture light efficiently, but also protect themselves from overload.
Absolutely. Photooxidative damage is a real risk, especially under high light stress. Plants have various protective mechanisms, including pigments that dissipate excess energy as heat.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to mull over. We know plants position their leaves strategically, but think deeper, inside the cell itself. If a plant cell is getting blasted with too much direct, intense sunlight, or perhaps the light is coming from an unexpected angle, what unseen dynamic adjustments might be happening within that cell to fine-tune light absorption second by second?
Consider the chloroplasts themselves, those little green powerhouses. They aren't necessarily fixed in place. Could they actually move around inside the cell cytoplasm? Could they perhaps turn or reorient their internal thylakoid structures, guided by light-sensing molecules like phytochromes or phototropins, to either maximize capture in low light or actively shuffle away or shield themselves to avoid damage in harsh, direct sun? How dynamic is the light harvesting machinery itself on a micro scale?
Something to think about next time you look closely at a sun-drenched leaf. The unseen microscopic ballet managing the planet's energy.
The complexity just goes on and on.
See you next time for the deep dive.